What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with frequent guest of the podcast, friend of the podcast, Salman Ali. He runs Red Nation Hoops. Follow Red Nation Hoops on Twitter at Red Nation Hoops. Follow Salman on Twitter at Salman Ali NBA. That's at SALMANLAI NBA. And then subscribe to Red Nation Hoops. The link to where you can do that, their YouTube channel, and how you can subscribe to all his writing. That will be in the podcast and YouTube description as well. Excited to talk to him about the Houston Rockets, if you haven't caught that already. A team that they've been fascinating all year, but they came on lately before the Alperen Sengun injury, which is something we need to get into. This whole idea that, not that they're better off without Alperen Sengun, but is there something weird here that this happened after he left? It was like, no, they won 4 or 5 before he went down. But first and foremost, Salman, how the heck are you? I appreciate you powering through. I know that we were dealing with some, I don't know if it was my fault with StreamYard or just the mic, but I
No,
appreciate you powering through the mic issues.
no, that's 100% on me. But I'm glad it's working. We're using the handheld mic today, but it's a microphone and it records my audio.
I feel like I should take mine out of its cradle just so that we're both holding it, but it's too much. It's too hard to get in and out, so I'm not going to do that.
Don't do it on my account. Where you got it is fine.
How are things going?
Things are going well. The Rockets are up until recently had been winning games. They are a fun team to watch. I mean, I'll be honest. Even during their losing spell in February, they've been a fun team. Like it's not that watching them lose is fun. Is like during the rebuild, there were times where I just didn't feel like I was learning anything. Right.
Right.
Because nothing mattered. Like that first year, they had nobody. Jalen Green wasn't even on the team, right? Jayshawn Tate was the only remaining player from that first year of the rebuild, right?
Oh, wow.
So, and you knew that when you're watching, like none of these guys are going to be here. I know that while I'm watching it, so I'm like, there's no point. I'm watching these games sometimes like after the fact on replay, so I can fast forward through a lot because I know none of this matters, right?
It's like April basketball for a lottery team, but all season type.
Right. But then they draft Jalen Green, and like, okay, that's important, right? So like now the games are a little bit more interesting. They draft Jabari Smith. Obviously, they drafted Sengun that first year. Tari, Eason, all these little prospects, they come in and they make the team more interesting. And now they're kind of crescendoing this year, obviously, with Ime Udoka kind of using them in a more coherent manner, right? And it is just it's leading to very, very fun basketball. And the team has some character now with Van Vliet and Dylan Brooks.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that extensively leading into the offseason, and it seems like it paid off. And they were just, I will say I found them more fascinating once Amen Thompson started to play is when I really just like lasered in on them. But just the whole, what is Cam Whitmore going to do? And then the Sengun improvement. But I kind of wanted to start here as we're recording this. Their play-in chances, and well, by extension, their playoff chances. They've taken a little bit of a hit after losses to the Mavericks and the Timberwolves. The Thursday night game against the Warriors looms large since that's the team that they're chasing. This is a pretty hellacious part of their schedule, but overall, they have been basically to the month, like over this past month, the top 6 offense to go along with. I think it was their 6th in points allowed per possession and 4th in points scored per possession over this stretch. And there's obviously 2 kind of different versions of this stretch where you had the first 5 games with Sengun and now without Sengun while he deals with that ankle injury. And I have so many individual questions for you, but when you kind of look at this most recent stretch from them, is there a overarching driving factor or two that just stands out to what is really just making this stuff happen right now?
Pace. They are a much faster team, and I think if you are going to make any connection from the Alperen Sengun injury to how the roster's playing now, I think pace is a lot of it. I think a lot of it is also just like some clarity. Like Jock Landale was just like a guy who played one night and didn't play another night. This team is like, it's not like the best team in the league, but it might be the deepest team in the league because it's just like there's like 9-10 guys that deserve to play every night, but they just can't, right? Because there are more important guys in front of them. And when guys go down, I mean, it's unfortunate, but things kind of get easier in that respect. You can kind of play more guys, and I think that's been clarifying. Obviously, Ime Udoka made a comment during the All-Star break or post All-Star break that he wanted the team to shoot more threes and kind of space the floor a little bit more. And they were doing that when Sengun was went down. I mean, before he went down, but like that continuation of just getting that ball up more times per game. I think it's helping the team a lot more. And I think it's pretty clear. Jalen Green making jump shots is like probably the biggest development for the past. What are we like? March. The biggest development in March is Jalen Green making jumpers. That like just jumpers that he was missing at the beginning of the year. He's just now hitting them now, and I think that's probably the biggest difference in the Rockets play right now.
Yeah, he is. Well, I guess I actually want to go here first. So, do you think that they've learned? I mean, when you're looking at kind of the pace they've been playing before the Sengun injury on the season, when you're looking at their average offensive possession time, they were 12th. So, like, they're not particularly slow. That's bumped up since the Sengun injury. The biggest difference has been, though, like they are just running and blitzing after grabbing defensive rebounds, which is not something relative to the league average that they were doing a ton before. And is that something that, or is there something else that you think they've discovered about themselves without Sengun that you think can carry over to when they do have him? And then how do you go about implementing it? And I'm not saying that Sengun needs to play faster, because I think we're even seeing now, and this was one of my questions about Jalen, is if teams are going to go after guys with double teams, that's the value of having Sengun when you slow stuff down, like the way he's able to process and read the game in those situations has improved exponentially. And so, but I'm just wondering, based off what you've seen, is there anything that they've kind of discovered about themselves that you think can carry over or be implemented when he is healthy?
Amen Thompson.
I love
Amen
it.
Thompson is I mean, he's a real player. Right? I mean, like he might be the best defensive player under 25 years old in the NBA right now, or at least one of them. He's one of the handful of guys you can make a
Think he's better than
conversation.
Wemby defensively? That'd be a spicy take.
I mean, like he may not be better than Wemby because Wemby's a big, right? Like if you're talking about perimeter defenders, name someone that's 20 years old as good defensively on the perimeter as Amen Thompson. There's maybe like two, right? There's maybe two, right? Like
One of them might be his brother.
yeah, I mean, but like he is ridiculous though. I mean, like he really is so advanced for his age on the defensive end of the floor. He's gonna make all defensive teams. It's just a matter of how many. That's how I feel watching him. Like I thought he was a good defensive prospect. He's really like expanded even my perspective on what he can be in the NBA long term. Offensively, what he's doing without a jumper off the ball is like it's really difficult to function in the NBA without a jumper. It's
Mhm.
it's damn near impossible if you're not a center, right? And that's what I meant. Like he is not a center, and he has no jumper, and yet he is effective off the ball, just playing in cutting lanes in the dunker spot sometimes, being smart about setting screens. Like he is a really, really capable basketball player. And I'm almost curious, like what's going to happen when this guy really develops some on-ball strength, right? He already had some of that going into the NBA. That was kind of his appeal as a prospect. I mean, when he actually has those moments to get the ball, I'm curious to see what he's going to do. Jabari Smith I know you asked me what other things can the Rockets carry over. Jabari Smith at center, I think is a nice look. I think they should have done some of that more while Sengun was healthy. Frankly, I didn't understand the minutes that Jock Landale was playing. Actually, frankly, when they had Jabari just sitting there who could play center, just
Mhm.
never used, that was never asked to play center, and you're seeing now how that could be a real tool. Um, what I am curious now, though, is how is that spacing going to look when you get a healthy Sengun back and he's having to play with Amen Thompson? Like, those two have kind of finagled it to make it work because they're just so smart. But when you get to like higher levels of basketball, teams are going to, it's very easy to game plan. Maybe not to take everything away, but make things really difficult on the Rockets when you have two non-shooters out there. Flat out in today's NBA, you can't play. You have to play four out at the minimum. You have to play four out, and having these two guys is a problem for that. But that's a problem you can worry about later. For the time being, there is some stuff here that you can really sink your teeth into. And it's just fun. It's just fun basketball. Watching them play fast, right? Like this is something that you're right that Sengun does have to learn how to play faster with the group when they come back. But also like when Sengun's on the bench, this is something they should try to do. Emulate this style,
Mhm.
right? Lean into it when Sengun's not out there, because it always feels like when Sengun's not out there that like they're just leaning into this Fred VanVleet pick and roll thing, and it's like, okay, yeah, like that's obviously going to be there all day for you, but long term it's not going to be there for you, right? Like, you're going to have to develop an identity when Sengun's on the floor. So I think that's something you would look at when Sengun is healthy. Like, can this team replicate that pace once in those moments where he's not playing?
Is that to kind of look at Amen Thompson specifically when you mentioned that, kind of establishing that identity when Sengun is catching breathers? Is that the pathway to not only seeing him do this stuff? I mean, like, he's been great. You mentioned all this other stuff. The only thing that he's been great on the offensive glass for someone his size. His offensive rebounding rate is just absolutely absurd. The stuff they can do with handoffs with him. But
he just dunks. He just dunks. That's all he does. He just dunks. That's his offense. Like, I'm just gonna get the ball and I'm gonna dunk, no matter where I am, no matter if I'm in possession to dunk. Like, I'm gonna dunk. Like that's Amen Thompson as an offensive player right now.
Are they still invested, do you think, in expanding that? But because like he was billed as a point, like a point guard wing coming in, and we haven't seen too much of him on ball. He's running under 3 pick and rolls per 36 minutes on the season. That's not the end all be all, but it's just, you mentioned it, like they're not using him in that type of role. Is that something they're going to try and groom him for down the line? And two, is having him run like those non-Sengun units, especially in this vein, like the end goal or the best way to optimize that aspect of his development?
Well, if they're not going to groom, some other team is. I mean, like, that's
Well,
just the
I
reality
guess
of
that
Amen as a. Yeah,
it gets
go ahead.
awkward. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think a lot of people have talked about, and you actually mentioned this on a podcast you recently recorded. There's been this discussion about, Amen Thompson or Alperen Sengun, and there is some functional complications there, but it really might be an Amen Thompson or Jalen Green thing if you're looking at trying to develop Amen Thompson more on the ball. No.
Well, I do actually think it's an Amen or Sengun thing. Like,
Oh, okay.
I think the Jalen and Sengun thing is kind of a dumb conversation. They're complementary. Same thing with Amen and Jalen. They're complementary theoretically. What's not what's not complementary is those three together, right? Like, because you can't have, like, two of those guys just can't shoot. They need the ball, right? So like, what you have to figure out here, if you're Houston, is like, who has the higher upside? You, as an organization, you have to make that call. I don't want to say now, but soonish, because Sengun's coming up for an extension
Yeah,
this
people are getting
summer.
paid. Yeah.
Yeah, and restricted free agencies next summer if you want to play that game. So you have like one more year to look at this again. But in the next calendar year, you're gonna have to make the call. Like, which one of these two dudes has the highest upside? Because again, you have to play 4 out, and unless one of these two dudes shows real promise at developing a jump shot, long term, you kind of have to bet on one of them, and then let the other one go or trade the other guy. And that's kind of what I'm interested to see is like, can any of these guys develop a jumper? And if not, like, how far can Amen take this, right? Because he hasn't had the on ball reps, right? Like,
Mhm.
we don't really know what he is on the ball, right?
He's been doing some already though, when you kind of just see it when he just comes around a screen or something. He's just so fast and
Mhm.
it's not even like the handle is fine, but he just blast through traffic would be the best way to describe. Where it's just like, I don't know when he gets going downhill when you have the spacing necessary. But of course, as you mentioned, that does get tougher with Alp on the floor.
Yeah, and his handle in a lot of ways it can be better than Jalen's, because like Jalen loses the ball a lot. Amen doesn't do that, right? He has like a more because he's just used to playing point guard.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if the Rockets can find that's the tough thing. Like, how do you find the opportunities on this roster, right? Like there's everyone's down and he's still not finding those opportunities, right? Like,
Could that be a function of, well, we're trying to make the play-in, so we're not going to experiment as much at this point. I guess that doesn't get any easier moving forward because expectations will only rise after this season. But could there be some of that, or just he missed so much the beginning of the season, we didn't have time to kind of induce this stuff to begin with?
I I just think it's a manage it's expectations are high.
Mhm.
Like that's what it is. That's what it's been all year. That's what it continues to be now. They were expected to make a jump this year, and they made that jump. Credit to them, but going forward, they're not going to be expected to stop, right? So
Right,
like,
right.
I wonder like how you finagle this, right? Because it may like you got Van Vliet, you got Jalen Green, you got Cam Whitmore, and Cam was just down for like I don't this huge stretch, and so I'm wondering like, is it gonna take? I don't want this to happen. Is it gonna take an injury to one of your two ball handlers, right, Jalen or Fred, to see
Mhm.
that? I hope it doesn't. I hope the Rockets can find a way to discover that without that happening. But like, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at it. I'm like, what reason would the Rockets have to give him the ball when everyone's healthy? They don't. I mean, especially since he's finding a way to make it work in the dunker spot and as a cutter.
The thing I would wonder, and I would agree, it's a concern worth monitoring moving forward. But when you look at, especially pre-injury, he played fewer than 15% of his possessions without both Fred VanVleet or Alperen Sengun on the floor. So isn't there more room to just stagger him? Like you could still start him, you could do whatever. And as you mentioned, he's finding ways to make it work. And if you're looking to establish that identity without Alperen Sengun, him and Fred VanVleet optimize each other anyway. Is there like, especially because you don't want to make this call anytime soon. I know the extension talks with Green and Sengun complicate this, but isn't there room for when they're at full strength, just more of, well, we can lean into Amen on the ball or at least experiment with that while we have our two of our offensive stars off the court, or even if it's just like, Alperen Sengun and then one of Fred VanVleet or Jalen Green off the court.
I'll say this, Dan, and maybe this is naive of me. Maybe this is hokey. Um, I've always believed, as long as I've watched basketball, the best players are going to shine through. No matter what barriers you put in front of them, they're gonna shine through. They're gonna find a way to tell you why they're the best players, right? So if a man is one of those guys, he'll find a way to tell you, right? Like Sengun, God knows how many barriers he had put in front of him
Mhm.
these past 3 years. He found a way to tell everyone. No, like you can't deny this talent, right? So if a man is that guy, he'll find a way. He's finding ways right now in a lot of ways. Defensively, like that talent is undeniable, right? As a finisher, that talent is undeniable. Now, he's going to have to find ways to get the ball in his hands. And maybe that's just a function of him being more aggressive to ask for it.
Uh,
But like I think the best players usually just find a way. And if he's better than Sengun, he'll find a way to tell us.
Jalen Green, how much what when you talked about, he's hitting his jumpers, he's over 40% on step back threes over the past month plus. I do think he's done a better job of like kind of changing his pace when he gets into the lane lately as well. He's shooting 70% at over 70% at the rim during this stretch. How much, I guess it's a fewfold. What's impressed you the most about this? And how much do you read into it when trying to scale it forward when looking at, well, what's the next frontier from Jalen Green? And can we get at least this version of Jalen Green sooner in the season? Because this has happened pretty much every year of his career where it's like the clock turns to the middle to late February, we get into March, and he's just going off.
Yeah, this happens even in the G League. It happened. The second half of the year, he was better than the first half of the year, which is um, just a testament to how streaky of a shooter he is. Like, and what streaky jumpers are one thing. What I find kind of odd is how his finishing just improves from like the first half of the year to the second half of the year. So okay, yeah, if the jumper is not falling, whatever, that's so that could be randomness,
Mhm.
but like the finishing should be consistent throughout the year. Why is it taking this jump? And that leads me to believe it's a mix of the streaky jumper and confidence, right? Like it seems like the jumper leads to him finishing better at the basket, leads to him
Mhm.
drawing more free throws, leads to him getting more passing opportunities, right? Like it's all connected in the way that we all kind of believe offense is connected. So I think with Jalen, what was your question? Sorry.
Like what, I guess, what has impressed you the most, but like how much do you read into this moving forward? Like, what can we take away from this long term to say, is this the permanent or indefinite or the every month version of Jalen Green that we could get?
I think what we should take away from this is we shouldn't write off the version of Jalen Green that becomes an all-star,
Mhm.
but that he's gonna have to really work on becoming a consistent basketball player. Like, because there are just way too many games where like the jumper is not falling and he's not effective, right? So he needs to find a way to be a more consistent player, whether that's working on the jump shot in the offseason, whether that's, I don't know, finding a way to be a highly impactful playmaker. He's going to have to find ways to impact the basketball game when the jump shot's not hitting. So what I'll say this is this season, and I said this before the streak happened, he's improved defensively and he has improved as a distributor, right? The ball handling for some reason has lagged behind. There are still way too many moments where you can just pick his pocket,
Mhm.
right? There's just way too many moments where you see that happen. A pesky defender gets into him and just takes the ball away from him. He has to get better at that. Like, he's a guard. He just has to get better at that. Long term, I think Jalen Green's best path to stardom in this league is as a lead guard. Right? I
Okay.
don't think this kind of player archetype works anymore as an off guard because he's just not good enough defensively to be that impactful, right? Or like an elite enough shooter to be that impactful. He has to, this kind of player archetype. I'm talking the Zach Levines of the world, the Bradley Beals of the world, the Damian, not the Damian Lillard. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, like the off-ball shooting guard archetypes that were just so prevalent in the early 2010s that worked, right? That's not going to work anymore, I don't think. I think you kind of need to
Interesting.
be more dynamic with the ball in your hands to be a star. Now, this player might still work on title teams.
Okay.
I just don't think it's going to be as a starter, right? Like, I just like you're that's like the Jordan Clarksons of the world, right?
Right.
Like,
It feels like, though, that he can be, so the best version of himself is still so complimentary without him needing to be your lead ball handler. Like,
well,
he
both things
could
can be
play off
true though,
Amen
right?
Thompson or he could play off Alperen Sengun. And so if you're saying he'll never reach stardom by kind of being in the two guard, well, I don't want to call him an off guard because he operates on the ball a ton. But I would still think that his ceiling would be pretty high if you don't bill him as your sort of de facto floor general.
Well, here's the thing, Dan. Like, you're gonna have to form a defense around him that everyone on the floor other than him is pretty much a positive, or everyone on the floor other than him, um,
I mean, the
or
Rockets have pretty much done that.
well, yeah. I mean, it's possible, but you're also gonna need to get your distribution somewhere else, right? You're also
Mhm,
like the goal for the Rockets and the goal for any title team should not be how do we get the best out of Jalen Green? It should be how do we get the best out of this roster? And if you're
mhm,
trying to answer that first question, I think you're just asking the wrong questions, right? Like, if you really have to go that far to make a team led by Jalen Green like operate clicking on all cylinders like that, maybe you gotta rethink some things. I don't know. Like, I just think if I'm thinking about Jalen Green's career long term, I don't think this archetype just works like at the highest of levels as a star. I mean, you look at the other stars in the NBA, they can all handle the ball. The other star guards in the
mhm,
NBA, there's not some like the Klay Thompsons. They come around every once in a while, and usually they're elite defensively and elite as shooters. This is not one something that Jalen is. That's not Jalen. That's not Jalen in any respect. So if you're talking about someone like this, like Devin Booker became an elite ball handler. Bradley Beal became good enough to be a lead ball handler in Washington. Um, Zach Levine, like that. Here's the thing: there's a reason he's borderline, right?
mhm.
There's a reason he's borderline. It's because he's not that.
Alperen Sengun,
Yeah,
pre-injury, might even still win most improved player. I think that field is wide open. I know Tyrese Maxey's like this super heavy betting favorite. We know the usage and the overall opportunity just has increased, but what stood out to you the most about his improvement this season?
you're not gonna like my answer here, Dan. I don't think he's improved that much.
You think this is like a case of he just has the license and this is
Yeah,
what happens when he does?
I think a lot of it is. I think a lot of it is. I think there are improvements, right? Like I think defensively he's taken some steps up, but I mean when you look at what he was doing last year in his limited minutes and limited role, or whatever, it's not too dissimilar. He has gotten more efficient marginally. It's not too dissimilar to what he's doing now. I think really somebody just had to give this dude the green light because he was just the best player on the team for the last 2 years, and no one ever acknowledged it. And now Ime Udoka came in and kind of, to his credit, maybe there was some resistance going into that idea, but to his credit, quickly adjusted, right? And I think you're seeing what the fruits of that, right? Now what I think he needs to really improve upon next year is he seems to, whenever he does get the ball, he seems to feel like a rush to score or pay make, or like, and he needs to just find a way to exist in possessions, right, without being the guy, right, which is find a way to be complementary without having to be the center, right, like without having to be the center of everything. If you look at even the most impactful bigs in the NBA, they can still do that, right? So when Jalen has it going, when Fred has it going, when Cam has it going, he needs to find a way to kind of float into the background while kind of being additive, and then come back in. I think that's something I want to see from him. Obviously, the jumper is possibly the best way he can improve his offensive game,
and also fit into a more equal context, because if he's going to be able to dot the arc, that's going to be more complimentary than if he can't do that, because then he doesn't need to be involved in primary actions as often.
Right, and that helps him, be that kind of floated in the background kind of character when he needs to be. And also I just think I wanted to see more pick and roll reps with him with Jalen, because I saw so many with VanVleet, and great. Like I get why the Rockets milked that play this year. Right, it was so effective for them this year. But again, you have to balance this with the long term, right? Maybe doing that helps you win more games now, but trying to win the most games long term, I want to see more with Jalen. I want to see more with Cam. I want to see more with the men. Right?
I would love to see. And
if
it's been, I have not noticed it, but I would love to have seen like inverted pick and rolls involving him and Amen Thompson. Would be super fascinating. One, I think that's resting on like, okay, one of them needs to have an operable jumper, but that would be functionally fun. I do agree about the defensive improvement. It seems also like he matches up better or holds his own against like the bigger bigs, if that makes any sense.
Sabonis. I thought he did much better this year against Sabonis. Like Sabonis kind of bullied him last year. And this year, I thought he stood his ground.
And I would also agree that just the skeleton, the base of his offensive game is just eerily similar, but it does feel like he has the game on a string more, to like where if he's going to see more doubles or like that.
To who? Oh, to Sabonis.
Alperen Sengun, excuse me.
But are you making the comparison to Sabonis?
No, I'm not comparing him to Sabonis. I think he's.
Okay.
I think he has a higher ceiling than Sabonis. I think maybe not. That's probably unfair to Sabonis. But looking at Sengun, I think Sengun can initiate your offense in more ways than Sabonis can. And so when you go into stuff as a scorer, they might be more similar there. I think Sengun's offense to me improved in the sense of like kind of the decision making when he's looking at double teams or recognizing and how good of a one-on-one scorer he actually is, because there's always been data to support that. And now we're seeing him really, I guess what you're saying, like maybe being too quick sometimes to try and process things, but I almost kind of appreciate with how decisive it feels like he's been as a scorer this year compared to some of the years past. And that might be just a product of, well, they finally emboldened him to do all this shit in higher volume.
Yeah. And I think I'm starting to rethink the Alperen Sengun like spectrum in terms of successful player. Like, right, like I think at the beginning of the spectrum, the way I always thought about it is this guy is way too skilled to not be a starter in today's NBA, right? Like I just thought he was going to be a starter somewhere. And then the middle of that spectrum was a Sabonis, right? It's the one that was probably the most talked about, right? Because it was just the easiest without being the most, while being the least defensive, right?
Mm.
Right? Because the end of that spectrum is Jokic, right? We've talked about that, right? But there's something in the middle of that, and that's Pau Gasol. And we don't talk about that enough. Maybe because he's not top of his mind, right? But like Pau Gasol was awesome, and he's better than Sabonis, right? And he's in that kind of cushy middle ground where he can. Pau Gasol at his peak was one of the two most important players on a title team, right? And if Sengun can get there, like obviously you're thrilled with the outcome, right? And he doesn't have to get to that Jokic level, right? And I feel like maybe it's because Pau Gasol retired kind of like what was it, like 4 or 5 years ago. He retired, and we saw the best of Pau Gasol like 15 years ago, right? Maybe that's the reason it's not that comparison is not top of mind. But I'm starting to think of that more when I watch Sengun.
That's a pretty good comp, and it's also kind of proof of okay, like we saw Pau Gasol, who always had kind of range. Like he started shooting threes towards the end of his career, and he was able to hit them. So I've never thought about Alperen Sengun in that context. So that would be interesting. The other player on Houston's front line, I think, has flown under the radar this season, at least nationally. I'm sure Rockets fans know about this. Jabari Smith Jr. is just like when you look at the counting stats, it's not he's not exponentially better than last year. I mean, the 3-point shooting is just up, up, up. But he has been just really rock solid across so many different areas. Is there anything that sort of stood out to you the most? And then what does kind of the next frontier for him look like? Especially because I think what it's intrigued me the most is if you're going to worry about tying all these different pieces together when you talk about the Alperen Sengun, the Jalen Green, the and Amen Thompson dynamic, Jabari Smith Jr. is so critical to doing that because of how complimentary he is at both ends of the floor now. Is it like the defensive numbers and rim protection have held up when he's played the 5 this year, and we've seen it most recently during this non-Sengun stretch, but then just also like what he's able to do on offense. Like he still likes to go to those counters, those fades, those turnarounds. It doesn't always hit them at the greatest clip, but like he's just more patient when he's in that center floor spot and making better decisions there. And he's making better decisions, whether to connect on the screens, to slip the screens. And then of course I mentioned the shooting already. To be that complimentary allows you to try all these sorts of different things with 3 players who there is, I don't want to say there's some redundancy, but you have to invest in parts of their games that might be counterintuitive to then keeping some of the others at their peak. And I just really appreciate kind of I don't necessarily want to call him a connective tissue, but the way that he is playing just allows him to be a part of so many different lineups and prospective iterations of this Rockets team. So my real question, I'm sorry I went on that long rant, was like, what's impressed you the most? And like kind of what's the next frontier look like for him in your mind?
Yeah, I felt like talking about Jabari in the summer. I felt kind of mean. Like it started. I felt like I was starting to get into mean territory because right, I started calling him a theoretical basketball player, right? Because every time I heard people talk about him, it was like what he could theoretically do, right? And it's like, did anyone watch him last year? Like Tari Eason should have been starting over him, right? Tari Eason should have been starting over him. He was just flat out a better player, and they didn't do that move for whatever reason, but he was really, really hard to watch last year. He looked like a broken prospect. And I think a lot of this actually stems back to draft time when Paulo Banchero was taken number 1. And so much of the expectation was Jabari's going number 1 for sure. Right. And I think that kind of, I don't want to say shattered his confidence because obviously he picked it back up, but it definitely put him on his back foot in a way that he wasn't expecting because he had a bad summer league and he had a bad regular season. And you see whatever he did in the summer, right? I think John Lucas, Kelly Ika wrote an article about this. Talking to John Lucas and kind of getting out of his own head helped him a lot, right? Because the Rockets could see that this was affecting him, right? This whole like, I was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick. Now I'm number 3. Am I even a good prospect? Right? Like, and I think it, what's more confidence driven than jump shooting, right? I mean, he was a 30% jump shooter last year. I don't think he suddenly became a 36% jump shooter overnight. I don't think that what we saw last year was true.
Right.
Right. But I did see, like, in addition to the confidence coming back, like, I think that's the biggest thing you're seeing with Jabari, just a phenomenally more confident basketball player. The second biggest thing is the ball handling, man. My God. I mean, I haven't seen a player get better at one skill during the Rockets rebuild than Jabari did from year 1 to year 2 as a ball handler. Like that, he was just really awkward. Like, and that goes back to his Auburn time. So it wasn't like the confidence, the light turned on for him. No. It was like he did something in the summer. Like he really worked on that. right? Like he knew that was a weakness for him. He knew that was something that everyone talked about. Like this guy's kind of an awkward mover with the ball in his hands, and like I'm not really sure how he's ever going to get to like go-to scoring status if he can't ever get this. And he worked on it. He really worked on it. His hips are more flexible. He did yoga during the summer. I really think, people laugh when I talk about that a lot, but I really think that like that seemed to work. Like he just moves better, right? Like he was a stiff big at Auburn, right? He's not quite as stiff anymore. He's much more flexible of an athlete. You're seeing him get the ball off the rim and going full court with it a lot now, and it's like that's like really impressive. Like not just for like compared to what we saw last year, but for any 6'10" player in the NBA period to be
Yeah.
able to do, right? So I'm with you, man. He's been the most steady part of Houston's season, like by far. He's just been a rock. And obviously defensively, we knew what he was capable of. That no one ever doubted that. No one ever doubted his potential on that end of the floor. It was always like, what is this mystery box on offense? And we're starting to see some of that.
What do you make of kind of the Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr. dynamic offensively long term, where it's like two guys that neither really lives at the rim? I know Alperen Sengun is going to score close to the basket, and the offensive rating's been mediocre with them on the court this year. Does that speak to kind of Houston's sort of mediocrity on the offensive end overall, where they could definitely stand to have more like bankable shooters, I would say, on the court during certain stretches, or is there like some functional awkwardness there because of where Alperen Sengun likes to operate, where even Jabari Smith Jr., like now that he can pop or he's going to be able to be stationed beyond the arc, it helps some, but like he still does like to be in the middle of the floor at points.
Yeah, he loves that mid-range jumper, right? That fadeaway mid-range jumper. That's been his go-to shot since he was a baby, basically,
It's
right?
pretty when it doesn't even go in. Just like the counters and the moves he has,
Mm-hmm.
they're not always the most efficient options, but like they're fun to watch. I'm not gonna lie.
And that's the move that made me like think about LaMarcus Aldridge when I was thinking about his high-end outcomes, right? The fact that he has that kind of turnaround jumper in his game, that's what always okay. Like if this guy's gonna work as a star, like that's the guy I would look at, right? But yeah, you said in relation to Alperen Sengun,
What do you make of that dynamic long term
right,
offensively? Yeah.
right. If I were to construct, and I've said this before, if I were to construct a basketball player to put next to Sengun long term, I could not think of a better player, ironically, than both Tari Eason and Jabari Smith.
I think Tari Eason is the ideal complement to every single player in the NBA, personally. But carry on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but those two guys, the Rockets drafted two guys that can fill that role, and Jabari, from a shooting perspective, is absolutely the kind of guy you'd like to have next to Sengun because you have to play a floor spacer next to him, and someone of that caliber really opens things up for Sengun to operate because you can't leave him, you can't even sag off of him, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you can sag off of Tyrese, and you can't do that with Jabari. And so it's interesting to see. It was interesting to see them last year kind of be so awkward and be so combative with each other. Like you saw a lot of them like bickering and fighting on the court. I'm like, you guys, like, if we were to construct the perfect basketball player to put next to you guys on draft night, it would have been the other person. So I don't understand why this isn't working. So
Mhm.
this year, I haven't looked at the two-man offensive stuff. It's looked fine to me. I'm not gonna lie. Like watching them, like it hasn't looked clunky. It looks like they're functioning how they're supposed to. Um, that doesn't mean you can't do Jabari Smith at center, right? That doesn't mean you can't do that when Sengun hits the bench. Again, I think that is the best way to utilize Jabari is like sometimes as a backup center, and so I think that dynamic can work perfectly fine. Now, again, which direction you choose to like Jabari is a very flexible big. He can play 4, he can play 5. Which direction you choose to go with it is really dependent on which direction you choose to go with Amen or Sengun. It's really starting to crystallize to me that a lot of the decisions you make on this roster start from that one decision, right? Which way do you want to go with it, the Sengun or Amen? Because if you're going with the men, you got Jabari plays center, right? Jabari Smith Jr. is a center from now on. That's how you think about him. If you're going with Sengun, Jabari is a 4/5.
That's such a tough conversation to have just because we definitely, I mean, the sheer sample size, even if they were giving the ball a ton, but to not have the on ball anywhere near the on ball information for Amen Thompson, we know Jabari Smith Jr. can be the 5, which in theory then I would say gives you the agency to make that decision, but you just don't have enough information about the second player in that scenario, which is Amen Thompson, if you're going to make it an either or scenario.
And Tari Eason also gives you the agency to do it as well, right? Because Tari Eason can slide down to the 4, right, and play next to Jabari, right? Or he can slide up to the 3 if you're going with Sengun, right? Like you can be flexible in that way. But
yeah, they have a ton of like lineup skeleton keys, but even just, I mean, it makes it harder in a good way. Like Amen Thompson just doing what he's able to do is not a featured ball handler in lineups where sometimes there's 2 or 3 guys ahead of him in that pecking order is almost just tantalizing. But I do recognize, or at least from my perspective, you can't necessarily have this be his role, like because I think he can be so valuable as that on ball type of floor general.
I agree. Yeah. Right, like I said, like if they're not going to find it, some other team is going to find it, right? And it's not going to be what I'm starting to realize is that people really need to sympathize with what Sam Presti was facing in 2011 with the James Harden trade. No one was ever able to like put themselves in his shoes, right? Because they had like 5 prospects that showed real promise. It wasn't just those 3 with Westbrook, Harden, and Kevin Durant, right? You had Ibaka, you had other young promising guys on the roster, right? Maybe not as good as those 4, but like you had to make tough calls at some point. I think a correct revisionist, kind of criticism for that trade is maybe they chose the wrong guy the wrong tough call to make, right? I think when you look back at that, and I'm looking at what Rafael Stone's going to have to do in the next couple of years here, it's very possible that they trade one of the 2 most impactful players on their other team, right? And we'll look at it in hindsight and be like, what the hell were they thinking? But when you look at the fit stuff, I mean, you can only pick one of those 2 guys, right? The same thing with Westbrook and Harden. You can only pick one of those 2 guys. They picked the wrong guy, right? But I'm looking at the Rockets in modern time, and I'm like, you can only unless they drastically change the way they play over the summer, as we said a couple of times with the jumper, you only pick one of those 2 guys, and I don't sympathize with it, man. Like I mean, like I don't want to. I wouldn't want to be in those shoes. I wouldn't want to do it because it would scare me to death if I made the wrong call.
It's a good problem to have insofar as it's even a problem, but it's such a tough decision to make if you get to that point. I still think I'd rather and we'll get to more of that stuff, but I wanted to ask you about the Cam Whitmore experience really quickly. What do we make of that and how he fits into, we've talked a lot about the larger context of this team. And I know he's played in less than half the season basically so far. But he's just like, when you watch him, he just has some of these moments. And I forget, until he like some of his dunks, when he grabs the rebound, I'm like, oh yeah, that dude is 6'7". Like I kind of forget that sometimes. So he's another interesting wrinkle to this whole team building approach.
I find him to be the most hilarious person on the roster, and that he wasn't even supposed to be here. Like he was not supposed to be here, man. He was supposed to be in like Detroit,
like top 5 of some of the mock drafts. Yeah,
like he was supposed to be in like Detroit, Washington. Like, why is he here? Like, I'm glad. Don't get me wrong. I'm very happy, but I'm like, why the hell? Like this is like, it's such a luxury to have him here, and he makes a lot of those decisions we were talking about earlier easier as well, right? Because he is also so portable. That jump shot's real. It's not going away. We keep seeing sample after sample after sample of him just being a good shooter, flat out good shooter. So, and defensively, he may not be it yet, but he possesses some of the physical tools to show that he can be, a pretty decent defender. I don't think he'll ever be as good as Amen, don't get me wrong, or Tari, or Jabari, or some of the other guys on this roster, but he can be pretty damn competent. And
got like that detonative size, I would call it, to be a really impactful defender.
He got a lot of Jaylen Brown comps during the draft, right? Like you heard that name a lot during the draft because of just his body, right? He's got that just, he's got a man's body and he plays basketball like that, right? Cam is he's such a I love Cam Whitmore. Like, and there were times during the season where I'm like, should the Rockets have taken him at 4 and Amen at 20? I mean, that wouldn't have even happened, right? That wouldn't even happen. But like, should they have just taken him at 4 in hindsight? But like, obviously, Amen plays more, and you look foolish for having the thought. But that's how good he's been, and it's. I mean, listen, the analytic community was in on this guy during the draft. They thought he was projecting very well, right? But you just you would never think he would play this well as a 19-year-old coming in the. It's just there's no way you would
Especially
ever expect.
after like you just assume those medicals must have been horrifying for so many teams to just pass on him.
I listen. You don't want to get me started on this topic. I really. I think about it and I'm like, I'm gonna have an aneurysm if I keep thinking about this whole medical thing. Like the amount of people that just let that fly. The amount of people that do this job, right? That talk about basketball, that just let these GMs get away with pushing that bullshit. Right? Like not that there was medical problems, but that there was any possible medical problem that would justify him falling to 20. That was ever a possibility. The fact that anybody that we all just let them do that.
Right.
Like I just it really infuriated me. I don't want to get into it. I don't. But needless to say,
You want to talk about the merits of going with Jalen Hood-Schifino instead? I know. I will. The one thing I'll say really quickly is like, I guess if they're, and I don't know what the medical said or what the actual red flags were. There's probably a point in the draft so high that it's too risky. But how far he fell, there's a point where it's like, okay, like we're outside the top 7 now. Like these teams need to just roll the dice. And I don't even care if it's. I think a lot of teams kind of justify like we need someone now, and we don't know if he'll be available, and he's considered more of a project. Like you bet on the upside and figure out there's a certain point in the draft, and it's well before the 20s that he should have went. So like, yes, if it was going to impact his draft stock, I get it, but you get to a point where it's just it should never have gotten that low. I'd be in agreement.
It's just silly. It's just silly. Like right, like so. I had a board of guys that I wanted the Rockets to take in that range. Right, he was not. Obviously, goes to say he was not on that board. Right, but like what a name I did have on that board was Brandon Podmitsky. Excuse me. I always get his name wrong.
Pajemski, yeah.
Pajemski, Brandon Pajemski. So I had his name written down because I really liked him, and I was like, by the time the Warriors came around, I'm like, they're gonna take Cam Whitmore from us, aren't they? They're gonna do it. They're gonna take Cam. I have forgotten about Brandon. I'm like in theory, I should be happy that Brandon's there for the taking for Houston. He was on my list, but the fact that Cam was still on the table, I'm like, he's the prize now. He's the prize, and I just. Listen, like there's a brand of general manager in the NBA that just puts way too much into the esoteric stuff with these players. Like you're telling me you had a 30-minute meeting with the guy and you felt like he didn't have the heart, right? Like or like whatever it was, right? This pre-draft stuff has way too much weight behind it than the actual basketball games that you guys are paid to watch. Like you're not paid to interview these players. Who cares what they say? As long as they're not murderers, you should be thinking about them from a basketball perspective, right? Like I can't believe that there are people that are like, oh, he didn't seem like he was like talkative enough. Like he's kind of an introvert, too quiet. Like
what was
really
the Anthony Edwards knock? Is he interested in basketball enough? Or even Jaylen Brown? Remember the whole he's too smart to be a good basketball. He's too many other interests. That bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, like this idea that you would let the fact that he's an introvert impact your draft decision.
Especially in the year, I don't think that's ever an excuse, but we're in the year 2023 at that point. And you're going to stuff like introverts going to scare you away. Fuck off at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that draft, I mean, again, don't get me wrong. I love it. I love that there are so many
it worked out quite well for the Rockets.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It tells you that there's still an advantage to be played for not being a dumbass, right? In the NBA, right? There's still that edge. That edge still exists, right? Like I thought it was gone like 10 years ago. I was like, no, it's still there. It's still there. So yeah. I'm
glad that subject brought you alive, brought out the edgy version of Sam. I'm glad that that led to this. I have it's a question / theory because like we need to talk about just the Rockets defense at large, which is now 4th in points allowed per possession, which I don't think, I know they signed Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet, but like I don't think and I know they had Ime Udoka, and I know what the stuff said about Amen Thompson, I don't think anyone would have predicted they would have been a top 5 defense for the entire season. You dig into it, and I'm trying to figure out what's most responsible for it. And I think the national consensus, well, they've gotten some lucky opponent 3-point shooting. And yes, that's part of it. There's nowhere near all of it. When you look at the stuff they do well, the ball pressure, keeping teams out of transition has been incredible for them. And my theory when I look at it, and it's kind of similar to the Pelicans, because like they don't have this elite rim protector on the team, or at least not starting at center for them. When you just have size and length and mobility and the capacity to disrupt without just getting absolutely burned. And the thing that I think stands out the most to me is that you have guys who can like recover at every level, to where when you look at the stuff that they can do lower towards the basket, where if it's an Amen Thompson, or if it's a Cam Whitmore, if it was when Tari Eason was healthy and you have Dylan Brooks, like you just have these players that can be in so many different spots on the same possession, in addition to the ball pressure, that it coalesces into just this demonstrative, terrifying force. And that's just maybe a little bit in it, like incoherent of an explanation for their defense, but that's just where I've sort of landed with their defensive success.
Yes. I mean, so like, I agree. Like that's pretty much it. They have good defenders, man. Like all up and down the roster, they just have good and capable defenders. VanVleet, Brooks, Eason, Jabari, Cam, Amen. Like these guys are competent. They're all good. Jayshawn Tate is awesome, and he barely plays sometimes. Right? Like they just have like I had them. I thought there was a real chance that they would compete for a top 15 defensive spot last year, and I thought it was criminal that they weren't a top 20 defense last year, because I thought the personnel was there, man. The personnel was there. Don't tell me that they're young. Don't tell me that they're young. When they're that good defensively, they'll figure it out if you coach them, right? And that's part of why it was so obvious how criminally undercoached Houston was last year. Is like they had the personnel to be great in this respect, and they didn't, right? Or they never showed any promise there. And this year, it's like, yeah, when you're coached well, your strengths will come out as a roster, and their strength as a roster is versatility, it's length, it's strength in a lot of ways. And that came out this year with Ime. And obviously they have a chip on their shoulder. Obviously they are getting some 3-point luck. You're right, but the fundamentals are real, right? You dig underneath.
You don't get to top 4 by accident. That's not a thing.
Right. You look underneath the hood, and a lot of the stuff we think about with good defense is there.
So this, looking like taking a step back and looking at the big picture because of this season, how much does their success change the calculus of what they're going to do leading into the offseason? Because I think, and I believe that fans are fine to think this way, but we've kind of touched upon it, where it's like, well, you have Cam Whitmore and Jalen Green and Jabari Smith and Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson. All these dudes are not, like, those 5 guys are not Tari Eason. Those 6, all the odds of all 6 of those guys being on the next great version of the Rockets is exceedingly low. My question would be like, are we having that discussion this summer, or are they kind of in a let it marinate situation, looking at their 2025 cap sheet specifically and knowing how young some of these guys are and some of the injuries they've dealt with? Or is there going to be more of an urgency because holy shit, look at how good they were this year?
I think there is a reluctance to give both Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun big deals this summer, and that's fine. Don't do it. Wait, right? Like that's my thing. Give this thing until the trade deadline next season before you talk about the big swings. At least if you're talking about a swing for like a regular all-star, right? If you're talking about a superstar, all things should always be on the table. Everyone should always be on the table, right? You're talking about one of the 10 best players in the NBA, best 15 player, whatever. Like those kinds of players have the merit to demand everything being on the table. If it's anything less than that, wait.
I'm
Wait.
with you.
Yeah, like I don't see any reason to rush this. Most of the time, teams that do rush this end up regretting it. Right.
Mhm.
This is the hardest thing to do. That transition from rebuild to go competitive are really hard for a lot, especially these owners that get itchy trigger fingers. Whether that's from a trade front or from a front office front. I'm looking at you, Philly. Right. Like when they get itchy trigger fingers, they make dumb decisions, and you don't want to do that right now because from my perspective, the team has been pretty well managed. So just stand pat, wait for things to develop, not only from your team but from the market. Because right now, I'm looking at the market and I see maybe one or two guys that might shake loose that might be worth it. Right. I'm looking at maybe Donovan Mitchell might shake loose, right? Because some of his non-committal comments in the media these past couple of days. Maybe Trae Young because of just how weird the Atlanta situation is. I hope they keep Trae Young.
That's a kind way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they keep Trae Young. I really do because I have a lot of family down there. I have friends down there. I want them to be a good basketball team. I love Trae Young. I think Trae Young is a pretty
He's
fun
almost,
franchise forebearer.
I don't know. Behind the scenes, there's definitely stuff when you look at the coaching and locker room dynamics, but he's almost, I don't even say almost, he's become underrated in terms of what he can do on the court. Like
He's
he's definitely
ridiculous.
become underrated. Yeah.
He's ridiculous. Like I don't like if he shakes loose and the Rockets can grab him, it's a steal.
Well, that's, if
Right?
I can interject then. So what is and I think it's the way you describe, by the way, Raphael Stone should be opportunistic, which is just the best thing to do after the season that they've had. And you mentioned kind of the level of player that they would need. Is that what you're looking at, though? That archetype of player where it's a floor general lead guard type, the Donovan Mitchell or Trae Young? And it's like, and I guess the other part of that is we know the Mikal Bridges interest and rumors that the player you described, he's not good enough then to fit the mold for Houston to act, is
Yeah.
what you'd be
Yeah.
saying. I think I would agree at this point. If you were giving up
Mhm.
just picks and salary filler, where it's not giving up Jalen Green, but then I'm kind of looking at it and like, so you're just going to congest your rotation down the line even further. But I would agree that he's not a player that's good enough. So my real question then is, you mentioned Donovan Mitchell, you mentioned Trae Young. Is that kind of the archetype or the player type that you're monitoring the market for then?
So I should be clear. We talked about that decision with the men in Sengun, right? Mentally, I've kind of already thought about which way they should go. Not to say that's an easy choice. That's
I
informing a
bet you
lot
I
of.
can guess which way you're thinking they should go based off what you've been telling me for 2 years.
Um, oh,
Which, by the way,
sorry.
I'm going to give you your flowers every time you come on this podcast for that. I was on yours. You were on mine. I never said Alperen Sengun sucked, but I was just like, I don't know if he's building block material. Multiple times, time and episode after episode we did together, this dude's a star. And so you need to take a bow, metaphorical bow, if you don't actually want to bow. So shout out to you for you were among the earliest people on Alperen Sengun, maybe the single earliest person when talking about like what his peak. It wasn't just, oh, Alperen Sengun is good and needs to. You were very adamant for a very long time that he was the best player on the Rockets and the center around which everything should revolve.
Thank you. I mean, like, here's the thing. It doesn't matter, right? Because now it's obvious, right? Now we can just talk about, okay, this young kid, Amen. Like, the reason I really want to stress that it's a hard decision because what Amen is showing as a 20-year-old is pretty damn like it's something to think about. It gives you some pause in like having a firm direction.
I bet if he was healthy wire to wire, he wouldn't have finished above Wemby in Rookie of the Year voting, but this version of Amen Thompson playing as many minutes as Chet Holmgren, I wonder if that would have become a debate. That's just, I'm not getting into it, but it's more of a, I'm not trying to chop down Chet. That's how good Amen has been in his minutes this year.
Dan, I talked about it at the beginning of the season. If like I thought he could sneak his way in there, I really did because I was
don't know if anyone is like Wemby, Wemby being Wemby, but if this was Amen from day one, or if he just had the minutes like that these other two did, I'm very curious to see. He would have finished third, no lower than third, but I'm just very curious to see what the Rookie of the Year debate would have looked like in that top three.
I think here's the thing. I may have thought like he might have snuck his way in there. I thought it would look a little bit a lot different than this. It'd be with the ball in his hands.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
right?
That's a good point too. Yeah.
Yeah, like the way he's doing it is so unexpected. But nonetheless, like so when you talk about the direction, the guys that I named, right? Like I kind of have an idea in mind, right? That's why I'm looking at guards. But if you think Amen's the guy with a higher upside, then you look at Karl Towns, right? Because Karl
Right.
Towns,
There's just, I'm sorry, there's so many just interesting parallels to the Pelicans because, like, that's another name where it's like Karl Towns makes so much sense there because of what they need. But please carry on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
it's a perfectly reasonable parallel. I mean, here's the thing: Karl Towns also solves a lot of those same problems for you. Like he also fits in kind of cleanly. Like I think Mitchell, if you swap him out for like Jalen, for like Amen, and I'm assuming they're probably going to ask for Jalen, right? He makes a lot of sense, right? Just fitting in to what you have going, right? Without taking anything away. If you do the same thing on the other end, you swap out Sengun. Now, I would not agree with the move, right? Let me be clear. I would not want to do this, but if you were to make the hard basketball calculus that, hey, Amen has this superstar upside and Sengun is partly getting in the way of it, and we need to kind of make a basketball call here for the upside of the roster. We need to decide on which guy we want to amplify. Karl Towns will help you amplify Amen Thompson. He'll help you
For
amplify
sure.
Cam Whitmore. He'll help you amplify the entire roster in such a complementary way that doesn't take anything away. In the same way that Mitchell would be from the guard perspective, right? Now, finding a fair offer there is tough, right? Because even mentioning Sengun in a possible trade for Karl Towns feels kind of dirty, right? It feels kind of dirty, but you have to
Especially with
make
Rudy Gobert in Minnesota.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's kind of what you have to think about, right? And maybe you reroute Sengun to a third team, right? Like that's and get assets back. Because here's the thing: Minnesota's gonna have to make a tough call. Everyone said it. I'm not new in saying everyone's in national media said it. Like that the financials are there are something to think about, and they have this weird ownership situation where it really does.
They're another team that should, at the absolute earliest, like that should not be a decision that's made until the 2025 deadline. But because of the ownership situation that you mentioned right now, it's kind of like, well, fuck, anything might go this offseason.
I can't remember anything like this ever. Like
Glenn
Taylor,
like this special breed of like, I don't know. I don't even know. I'm not going to root like A-Rod and Mark Lore. Like the way they've been jabbing at each other in the media, that whole situation is just fucked. Like it's just, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, like it really does feel like, doesn't it? Like that the Timberwolves were better than Glenn Taylor expected they would. He's like, no, this is fun. I want to stay. I want to keep.
I do tend to side with, insofar as I'll ever side with owners. I do tend to side with Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lore there, just because they were the ones that we know drove the Tim Connolly hire and kind of forced the Gobert trade through. And so I'm with you that Glenn Taylor kind of looked at it like, oh, I have this appreciating asset where the team's also good, so it will continue to appreciate. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done.
Right. And he had all these deadlines and stuff in the contract. I was like I'd like to. Why aren't these deadlines leaking? Right? Like why don't we know what
hasn't
this
the
is?
NBA come out? Like, I guess we understand that the NBA probably doesn't want to get involved, but it's so they're mentioning
they
the
kind of
NBA
have to,
deadlines,
though,
and the
don't they?
NBA has yet. You have Glenn Taylor saying they missed these NBA imposed deadlines. You have A-Rod and Mark saying, no, we didn't, and then the NBA just says nothing. Like,
Yeah, and at some point they're gonna have to step in, right? Like at some point they're gonna have to make a ruling on this because this is one of their 30 teams. They're gonna have to decide who gets to own it, right? Like so, I don't know, but yeah, the Karl Towns situation is coming to a head, right? So they're gonna have to make a tough call, and the Rockets in their way have to make a tough call, and so you kind of have to think about it, right? Because again, he does. If you go in the Amen Thompson direction, he does solve some things. He does clarify some things of the roster for you. So I don't know. It's just food for thought. Again, instinctually, I think guard, right? I think who are the best top end guards that are going to become available? I think Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell right now are the two obvious ones. I can't think of any off the top of my head that
oh,
are
I have
obvious.
So I was going to ask you because I believe, and I'm not saying Amen would need to be in all or even any of these deals if you're including enough picks. There's other players involved, but I do believe I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the Rockets years down the line. Sengun is the player that pops into my mind first, and so I have 6 names here that it can be. I would either have you. I won't have you rank them because I'm doing it on the spot. Are they players that you then would be like, are good enough to say, or good enough fits to say, okay, let's go in now. So I have Donovan Mitchell, and you're kind of a yes there, it seems like.
Yeah.
I did not have Trae Young, but it sounds like you're a yes on Trae Young.
Yeah. It's a harder fit conceptually, but yeah, he's good enough to where like you try to make it work.
So I have 4 more names for you.
Yeah.
Of players that I could see shaking loose, one of which, maybe 2 of which are ultra spicy, but Darius Garland.
Probably no.
Okay. LaMelo Ball.
Yeah. I would think about it. Yeah.
I agree with you. I didn't think you were going to say that, though, so I'm very happy you said it. I tend to be in the minority when it comes to being optimistic about LaMelo Ball.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler.
No. Too old.
And
go ahead.
My final name is Devin Booker.
That one's interesting. That one makes me think, because it's like theoretically, let me just ask you, they're gonna ask for Jalen, right? As one of the and you're the most optimistic projections of Jalen have him becoming a Devin Booker type, right? Like the most optimistic. I'm not saying you and I
That's
agree
like his
with that.
100th percentile outcome is Devin
Right.
Booker.
Yeah. I'm not saying you and I agree with that. I tend to not agree with that because I just don't think he's a strong enough shooter or ball handler to warrant that projection. But then again, Devin Booker got better as a ball handler. But shooting, still early on in his career, Devin Booker was much better than what Jalen Green is right now. But it's interesting because, like, would you just keep your, just see what you have? But at the same time, it is safer to just go with the 100 percentile outcome. I don't know. I would. I don't know. Like that's okay, because it's similar to the Donovan Mitchell one.
Yes, I probably wouldn't do it, but so I agree with you on LaMelo. I wouldn't do it for Jimmy just because of the age, although he would be super interesting in general for another year or two. I probably wouldn't do it for Darius Garland. I wouldn't do it for Donovan Mitchell, to be honest with you. I just don't know. He's had a hell of a season. I don't know if you're going to give up Amen Thompson and or Jalen Green in that scenario. I just don't know, like, the playmaking. Like, could you be at a playmaking deficit long term besides Sengun? I would absolutely do it for Devin Booker. I don't know what the package looks like, but if you're worried about missing the boat on Jalen Green, like Devin Booker, I think is one of the most underrated and valuable passers in the NBA today. And I know that Phoenix's 4th quarter offense and some of their turnover issues muddy a lot of that, but we've seen it when you look at his passes that lead to either assists, secondary assists, or free throw attempts. For the past half decade, he's always rated in just the top 5 of the share that his passes do that. And it's not, well, I've used it, it's not by accident. So,
well, let me construct the counter argument for you, Dan. Then he hasn't always been that way, right? Like there was a path there that he took, and Jalen, right? Theoretically, I'm not saying I agree with this. If you're a Jalen optimistic, which I might be somebody in that front office, which they took him 2nd overall. Theoretically, they see some of that path in the playmaking department for Jalen.
So what I would say to that is, let's just say you're able to construct a deal where you're not sending out Amen Thompson in that scenario because it's Jalen Green, some of your other prospects, and Pitt.
Okay.
I'm not going to say 1 for 1 because there'd be way other stuff in there because Devin Booker is really good. But
okay,
Devin
I thought
Booker,
you were talking theoreticals. Okay.
Right. Devin Booker is so much better away from the ball than Jalen Green is. As someone who provides rim pressure away from the ball as a cutter, we also saw, but I guess by year 3, there was that hint of, oh, this guy can command an offense as a passer. And the fact that we haven't seen that from Jalen, unless you think that is purely a matter of, look at how much the ground beneath him has shifted, the Rockets makeup and all that the past few years, or just that he hasn't had that opportunity. To me, Devin Booker is the one on this list. I'm probably just most intrigued by LaMelo because I'm intrigued by LaMelo. And then Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell doing streaming. Devin Booker's kind of like the no-brainer where it's like, no, if he's just looking at Phoenix, like what the fuck happened here with the way this roster turnover and everything in the outlook, and we get bounced in the play-in or the first round, he's the guy. Like I wouldn't even think twice about it.
Yeah. I listen, like I'm with you in that he is. You mentioned the off-ball threat. That's the shooting, right? Like Mitchell,
the shooting and the cutting, yeah.
like that. That's one where Jalen has not shown enough promise, for me to warrant a Booker projection, right? I'm still personally in that Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal projection, right? Like that's
Very
where
good
I'm
player, by the way. Then
right.
I hate these. I'm sorry, I hate these discussions because I feel like I end up then shitting all over Jalen Green, where it's like if you're still optimistic about him, his outcome is like perennial all-star.
Right. I mean, like I'm not saying I think he's gonna be Bradley Beal, but I think Zach LaVine very much is still my projection for him. Right. I haven't moved off that. Now, I think with regards to the passing, I have seen more on that than the shooting for me to be optimistic about Jalen Green's development. Right. I think there's more flashes I see from him as a passer where I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. So listen, I probably listen like the it's not the 1-for-1 that makes it hard, right? It's the 1-for-1 plus Amen plus the pick that you're giving up next, that you're the Brooklyn pick, right? That's coming up this year, plus whatever else that is required from Phoenix's end. It's not the 1-for-1. That's a no brainer, right? It's everything else. And in that respect, I kind of think that's why I like the Mitchell one so much, because like I think Mitchell at his peak is like a 28 points per game on crazy efficiency score, right? And that's the kind of guy that just perfectly slot in to this roster without even thinking about it, right? Just not even no thinking, right, involved. With the Booker one, it's like, yeah, I mean, he would fit in perfectly, but like you would also have to give up more than you're comfortable with.
I get that. Is there anything or anyone else about the Rockets, their future, this current version of them that I didn't ask you about that you think we need to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, Tari Eason's just been out. I
I
mean, yeah, like
Anyone
he's
who listens here knows we love ourselves some Tari Eason.
yeah. I mean, like he's just been out, and I
The
feel
injury
like
stuff was weird with him too, the way they were reporting it, where it seemed like at one point that he was misleading them in how much pain he was in or whatever Emi Udoka ended up saying. So I just want that dude to stay healthy because he's beyond fun to watch.
yeah. I mean, he is. I mean, defensively, he's the real deal, right? And he's shown more ball handling promise than I thought he was capable of coming out of college. It's just a quick note on him. Like, shout out to him. Hopefully, he gets better. I want to see him next year. It would have been really fun to watch in this fast paced Rockets offense.
They can just
No,
build some nasty small ball defensive combinations when he's healthy if they wanted to. And so the fact that we haven't gotten to see that is a basketball tragedy.
and I cannot wait for, regardless of what happens, regardless of like how likely I think the Rockets, like I think they're like 20% odds to make the play-in tournament, right? I cannot wait for them to play the Warriors tomorrow, right? Because the amount of like bickering that's going on between the two teams, and like some of it's just weird. Like Draymond, you're like a 10-time NBA. Like, how many All-Star games have you made? Right, you made like
Or not, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
he's won 4 championships.
yeah,
Like
you've made like 5 All-Star games, right? Like what's going on? Like you're bickering with like 23-year-old Tari Eason because he's on Instagram stories like talking about how the Rockets going to catch the Warriors in the play-in tournament. Like that's upsetting you, really? Like what about your dynasty falling apart, man? What about you staying on the court? Like how about that? How about you stop pushing people? Like how about we do that? How about
yeah.
we work on that before you wear the Rockets?
What's the over under on just like the time in the game where something happens just between him and Dylan Brooks? If I said
Draymond
it,
Green is not finishing the game. Draymond Green is not finishing the game. Dylan Brooks might not finish it either. Draymond's not finishing the game.
Salman, can you just tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you continue to put out?
Yeah, rednationhoops.com, Red Nation Hoops on YouTube, at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter.
I can't endorse this guy enough. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. We went as usual about 15 minutes longer than we said that we were going to, but hey, the Rockets do at least warrant it both in the immediate and the long term. So as you know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future. Thanks so much for your time, man.
For sure. Basketball is fun, Dan.